I can do that. There, I'm unmuted, but now I'm talking. Sorry, I'm talking to my technical team here. There's a terrible echo when I'm doing that. So we're going to work out all of that out as much as we can. I've said hello to Karen and Marcus. We also have Seattle Met Deputy Editor Allison Williams. Allison, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
It's lovely to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I see everybody. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Bill.
All right. I might just throw the headphones off at some point. Who knows? So I see Karen and Allison in domestic bliss. Marcus, you look like you're in the metaverse, or you're in a swirl of virus particles. I don't know what's going on with you.
Sorry, I can switch out my background if
I love it.
I had to jump on my mom's laptop as mine conked out there. So
it's fantastic. It's a groovy effect, and I hope you'll keep it. So anybody hoping for a little snow this weekend? I guess there's a slight chance after all we've been through. Allison, your face was a delight.
I've been waiting for snow since, I don't know, about like May. So I've been watching the mountains, and we had a lot of rain. It washed away a lot of the snow that was up there, but playing in the snow is like one of the best things to do in the winter here. So I am ready to go. The second the first snowflakes hit the ground, I'm good.
Reluctance from the rest of you? I'm with you on the snow. I know we've been through a lot. We've been through the wind and the rain and the floods and all that, but I think it beats flooding, which would happen a little bit this week, particularly up near Canada in Whatcom County. Not as bad as a couple of weeks ago. It also got unseasonably warm this week. I started the week walking in my t-shirt. Karen is nodding. You agree that I was walking in my t-shirt?
The weather has just been wacky. So wet, but kind of warm. I guess it's those, whatever, pineapple expresses or whatever they're called. Warm, but wet. Warm-ish. Warm for Seattle. My family in LA is like, that's freezing. I'm like, 50, are you kidding? It's amazing.
I think we've given up on Pineapple Express because they, not for any sensitivity reason, but my understanding is they don't all really originate from that, from the greater Hawaii area, or wherever pineapples come from. So now we're calling them atmospheric rivers. And I could probably think of an objection to that if you gave me long enough. But that's where we're at right now. Should we talk about, I mentioned virus particles a moment ago. Should we start in with the news? Yeah, sorry. From snowflakes to the less welcome little particles. We're talking now about the coronavirus Omicron, which as of Friday at noon has not been identified yet in Washington State. It's a matter of time, right? I think
at this point of the pandemic, nobody's expecting isolation of anything. And if anyone is, then I worry about their memory. Short-term memory.
Right. We know it's in California and other states. South Africa's seen its COVID cases go from 200 a day a couple of weeks ago to 11,000 yesterday, mostly Omicron infections. We don't really know how dangerous it is. As of right now, I know of, correct me if I'm wrong, guests, 0 hospitalizations or deaths of anyone diagnosed with Omicron. Have you heard differently?
I was looking, at least in the cases in the US, the handful so far, none have been. Many have been people who were vaccinated, but they were described as mild from what I saw. So it was bummed. At least one person had a recent booster. So I'd hope that might be more protective, but still mild. So hopefully.
And what we're hearing thus far from almost universally is that we don't know yet. What we know is anecdotal, and it's really hard to not jump to some conclusions. I know I heard the first case was found in US case was found in California, and it was a vaccinated person, and that carries so much weight, but it is still an anecdote, and we do need to wait a little bit to learn anything definitive about Omicron.
Yeah. Anything to add, Marcus?
No, just that we need to continue to obviously do our due diligence here, and everybody needs to, hopefully, those who haven't, please get vaccinated, get your booster, and hopefully wear your mask if you are ever in places with a mass amount of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those of us who are doing those things, it doesn't, I got to say, just personally, differently as a journalist, and of course it's nervous making, and more people are infected in some places. It's bad, but to some people, your approach to life doesn't necessarily change. I went to a live theater show last night in West Seattle at Arts West, and they were requiring vaccination proof. And I looked around me. I was ready to get out of my seat if I felt unsafe, and I just thought, well, I'm gonna do this anyway. I'm not recommending it for others, but I made that choice. And so the theater was pretty full for us. It's a very small, intimate place.
Well, I think we're just so used to thinking about the pandemic in terms of our community and then nationally how we're doing. We talk about parts of our country that are more vaccinated and not. And I think it's really, Omicron is reminding us we need to think more on a global scale. Think about what the vaccination rates are like in Africa, where they're, below 20% in a lot of countries, and the availability, like we know this by now. It's been a year and a half longer. We're all in this together. We don't get to opt out of the pandemic, even if we were to manage to vaccinate our entire country, which is looking less and less likely. So I think just like the concept of what the pandemic means, we know if it's in South Africa, it's going to be here eventually. We all need to coordinate more on a global scale and think about what we're doing to increase vaccinations there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say I've seen people even, adjusting on the very micro levels. People have started using using their vaccine cards as screensavers on their smartphones. It's easily accessible to give to the waiter now.
Saves a step.
Yeah.
And here in Washington State, Dr. Alex Brenninger, who's with the UW Medicine Clinical Virology Lab, he said that Washington's one of the most well-equipped states when it comes to identifying and tracking variants.
We have sort of the best eyes out there when it comes to looking for these variants and reporting on them. So I think, as soon as Omicron is here, we'll be one of the first to pick it up.
And officials are urging people not to panic. As you said, Marcus, that the advice hasn't changed. And I don't know, I heard Governor Inslee talk a little bit. I think he said, the usual, wear a mask and be safe and get vaccinated. He said that the number of people using the state's vaccine locator website increased this week by more than 70%. So there's evidence, and nationwide evidence too. Something like 2 million people got their shots yesterday, highest single day total in almost 7 months. So there's evidence that maybe, we don't know if it's connected to Omicron, but maybe it's a reason why people are getting vaxxed and boosted who might otherwise have lingered on it.
And I think one thing I remember is that even if the vaccine proves to be less effective against Omicron, the more vaccinations mean fewer people in hospitals and healthcare arenas are more able to take care of people when it's necessary. There's so many reasons, even if the efficacy does go down a little bit for the Omicron variant. And so, especially with the holidays coming up, if you didn't see everybody for Thanksgiving, if you're seeing them for Christmas, like now is the time to grab that booster.
Yeah. And anybody changing any holiday plans?
No, I think we'll definitely do the antigen test before it, like a little quick swab. I don't know if you guys saw, they're going to try to make them insurance cover the test, but it's still like the back end reimbursement because we do everything backwards in this country. It feels like sometimes, or look at other countries where they're just like sending it to people and things like that. And they're expensive here relative to other countries too. It's like,
Karen, isn't it something like for a family of 4 or 5, it'd be like, it costs like $80 or something for a test?
Yeah, they're like 25 a lot for 2, but in theory, you're supposed to do 2 each. If you actually do that one, though, I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, I think President Biden announced a few measures like that. As you said, would you say backdoor reimbursement or afterward reimbursement and a federal fund to pay for at-home coronavirus tests for uninsured people. Biden extended the mask requirement on buses and trains and airplanes into the spring. That's not really a change. It's just, it's not going to stop anytime soon. That's sort of the phrase that's the sentence of the week. It just feels like it's not going to stop anytime soon. What else? I saw that the federal government is going to send 80,000 more vaccine doses this month to Washington State. Mostly it's wait and see. Like, does anyone think this is going to change? I guess it's so early in the game, but presuming it comes here, let's say it seems to be relatively contagious, much more than the Delta variant. I realize I'm speaking early, but we don't know that it's more dangerous. but there are all these things on the table, like will this make any change when it comes to mask enforcement or vaccine proof enforcement or vaccines required in public schools? Like is it just safe to say we have no idea yet what this is going to do to the rest of our lives beyond the usual advice?
Sort of what it seems like right now. I mean, it's pretty early and there's just so much TBD in terms of transmission, how just dangerous it is in terms of like how severely ill you get and how that impacts, how that impacts if you have a vaccine already. I got my booster yesterday and the pharmacist administrator said that they've been slammed, pretty consistently. So it's definitely a moment again where the demand is outstripping supply. It's unclear to me if that's like the vaccine supply or just like the pharmacist supply, like the number of people who can administer them, since we don't really have those huge mass fax sites up like we did earlier. So I don't know, we'll see.
I think also we need to continue to talk about the effects of even mild cases down the road, things like long COVID that is still really not understood. And I know there's places, especially at UW, that they're looking at it, they're trying to understand it. But I heard a report somewhere, I think last week, that 1/10 of all lung transplants right now are going to COVID, people whose lungs were damaged through a COVID experience. That's just one kind of healthcare outcome that we don't know much about yet. And I think, while obviously preventing death is the very first priority, we also need to consider what we're going to be seeing if things like these if there are milder variants that come, what might the outlook be? It's great when there's a mild case, but I think probably all of us have known somebody who had a mild case that was still really hurt pretty badly by it.
Yeah, and I think we also need to continue to focus on inequities, where it is in terms of our industry and racially and in terms of ethnicity as well. I think the report came out that it was the healthcare and social assistance industry, where Black people are made up 35% of the cases in that sector, even though the population of that sector was only 21%. And I think with Asian people, they were 22% of the cases, even though they were only 14% of that particular population. So I know that public health officials say that they are continuing to monitor those inequities, but I hope that that we do continue to not just monitor, but hopefully bring those inequities down somewhat.
You're listening to Week in Review. That's Marcus Green from South Seattle Emerald and Seattle Times, and author of Ready to Rise. We've got New York Times tech correspondent Karen Weise with us, and Seattle Met deputy editor Allison Williams. And we are reviewing the week gone by for you, visually, by the way, too. If you want to go to Facebook or YouTube and search KUOW Public Radio. We are going to come back after a short break. We're going to talk about gun violence prevention, or the lack of it, and much more. Amazon holiday turnover and more, and the internet ending this week. I heard that's a thing. Stay tuned for more Week in Review. We're going to be right back. You're listening to Week in Review on KUOW Seattle. I'm Bill Radke. I'm told that I'm only broadcasting with my laptop microphone. So if I sound a little funky, that's why. I traveled all the way to our studio so that we can work around a tech issue. But heck, we've been doing that for a year and a half, right? So has the rest of the world. I can see Allison Williams and Karen Weise and Marcus Green, and we're figuring out what happened this week and breaking it down for you, telling you what it all means. Marcus, the South Seattle Emerald, where you write, has a story this week about King County and the city of Seattle trying to prevent more gun violence. What's going on there?
Yeah, so there was a meeting between residents of the Mount Baker lofts in the Mount Baker neighborhood and some city officials, including some King County council members and city council members. There had been a shooting there last week, a fatal shooting near the Mount Baker light rail last week, and that in many ways was just a continuation of so much other violence, I should say, that had been going on in that area for the past year and a half. And so many residents there are saying that this very much ties into the belief that when there's violence that happens in South Seattle, it's met with an asymmetrical concern or consideration than if that violence takes place elsewhere, like in Magnolia or north of the Ship Canal. One of the things that they've continued to say is that, look, there's been drug dealing going on, there have been homicides that have been going on, there have been robberies going on, there have been shootings that have been going on here since the pandemic, and still it appears that there's just been no cavalry coming or no sustained concern or sort of a sustained addressment of this issue with city officials. And so now, thankfully, that they've gotten some level of news media and attention on it, and that seems to have coincided with Sound Transit as well as some other elected officials wanting to get together and actually address and remedy some of these concerns at this moment.
Marcus, what are the remedies that these residents want that they're not getting?
Well, part of it is that you've had all these community hubs surrounding the area, including coffee shops, convenience stores, and other small businesses have been shuttered since the COVID pandemic hit. And that has, they believe, created conditions for a lot of these things to fester. They want economic revitalization and investment in this area. SDOT does own some facilities and buildings near the area that they're hoping can be developed soon and provide some level of revitalization and commerce. At the same time, there are some people who are asking for more patrols by SDOT around in the area. And they're also asking, potentially for, some level of community organizations potentially getting some additional funding. What's interesting about this is that I think, this has ramifications, not just in this area, but for the rest of the city. We continue to have a sustained conversation around the active role of policing and law enforcement in public safety. And it is truly a nuanced conversation. And this is a nuanced conversation that is happening in this area is, what is the appropriate level of policing in terms of where it should dominate public space? Should they maybe be the last layer as opposed to the first layer in that? And you see that now, and this is actually playing out in this situation where you've had Mayor-elect Bruce Harrell respond and say that, I think that we do need some level of increased SPD staffing in the situation. And you've had Tammy Morales, who represents the area on city council, say that we need to focus more on upstream issues. This is a debate that's going to continue to happen. And I think, especially in an area like this could potentially act as a case study of, okay, what does maybe a pathway going forward look like as the optimal level of sort of community involvement, law enforcement, as well as investment in the surrounding area look like?
I have many questions I could ask Marcus. We also have fellow journalists on the line here. Any questions or observations from Karen or Allison?
No, I know everything about this from South Seattle Emerald, but which is obviously such an amazing resource. I thought it was interesting how there'll be twice monthly meetings going forward. And that seems like, I'm curious, Marcus, if you think that will create greater accountability, or you think it'll fizzle? Like, how do you think that plays out over time? Or are there like precedent for having that ongoing commitment like that?
Yeah, I think the residents certainly know that the squeaky wheel is what gets greased. They are certainly optimistic that, there's some continued and sustained conversations and dialogue can bring attention to this. That being said, I spoke to a few who are saying that, they're a little wary that these meetings are only taking place because of the attention that this is now garnering. But 6 months from now, let's actually see if, these conversations have been sustained.
And I think I just, again, I too have learned about this through your reporting. And I think that one thing you've really hit there is that a single solution is unlikely to fix a single approach, and that you're talking about long-term investment far upstream rather than just addressing the immediate concern for the long term. And, I think about things like, gun control and gun access issues. Those are important to address, but that's also not going to help things next week. And yeah, just definitely reminding me of that importance of multi-prong approach.
Right. And how do you, and as many of the residents were saying, it's like, we have these immediate problems right now, but then we also have these downstream problems that we also need to take care of. And so can we walk and chew gum at the same time? It's yet to be seen if that can happen, but they are definitely hopeful. And I do just want to note that that this article was written by Ben Adlin. So I do want to just give him the credit for it. So
yeah, at South Seattle Emerald. Marcus Green, this debate that you mentioned about armed policing versus treatment and de-escalation, different responses. There was a settlement this week between the city of Seattle and the family of a woman killed by Seattle police officers. Would you say the killing of Charlena Lyles is an example of how people want policing to change?
Yes, I'll say this, and I want to preface this by saying that I am a person who lives with mental illness. Charlena Lyles also suffered with a mental illness, and that was known, previous to the shooting that took her life. As a matter of fact, 5 days prior to that fatal shooting, she had called the police, and there's an incident there where they had reported that she was, suffering essentially a mental health break. And I think this is a situation where, again, somebody of color who was dealing with a mental health issue lost their life, when it came to an incident with law enforcement. And I know that there are several advocates who continue to say that, and including police officers themselves, and I think that's kind of been lost in the conversation, is that there are many police officers themselves who will say that, maybe we shouldn't be the first line of response when it comes to trying to address a mental health crisis or somebody who is going through a mental health crisis, because we're not necessarily maybe the best situated, people to do so. Like maybe we can have mental health counselors who are activated in these situations. And should they see that things have escalated to a point where there does need to be, some armed law enforcement, then potentially maybe they can come in. I know that I've written about this before, and I've had a personal situation where, I was going through a mental health breakdown a few years back, and my mother was with me, and she said for her it was a Faustian bargain. Do you call the police and potentially have something take place in terms of me possibly losing my life, or do you, let things sort of, play out, and also, potentially they could escalate to a point where something else, bad happens. So do you call the police, or do you not, knowing that either way could lead to a dangerous situation? I will say that I think with all the talk of, police defunding and whether that's good, bad, indifferent, or what have you, I think this is one area, if you separate that, into just a conversation around should law enforcement be, again, the first responders to these situations. I think that there is more of a pathway and more of an awakening and agreement between people left, right, and center about, potentially there could be some support for, making sure that first responders are folks who do have some level of mental health counseling as opposed to just police officers.
Hey, Marcus, I want to say I'm so sorry that you and your mother had to face that Faustian choice, as you said, that you go through that, and thank you for telling us about it, and your own mental illness moments, and for writing about it so well as you have. So, it's hard to hear, and thank you for discussing it with us. I wonder, in the case of Charlena Lyles, if that was now almost 5 years ago. So maybe we should, when we talk about a failed response, will you just describe what happened?
Yeah, so I mean, the Reader's Digest version, if you will, of it is that Charlena Lyles, called the police to report a burglary. Two police officers ended up arriving at her house, or her apartment, I should say. One of the police officers did not have a taser, even though he was required to have one. She ended up brandishing a knife and saying that she was going to transform into a wolf. The police officers stated that they were in fear of their life, and they ended up shooting her. I believe it was 7 times. In front of her 4 children. One of the children actually crawled on her afterwards. So it's just a very harrowing experience. And her family, as you laid out, for the last 4 years, have been seeking some level of accountability and answers. And they were able to receive this settlement, earlier this week, which, even though for them, right, it's some level of satisfaction, it obviously does not replace the loved one that they lost.
And I saw that Lyle's son said that the family wants to see these officers criminally prosecuted. Is that going to happen? Where does this case stand?
It doesn't appear that that's going to happen. There is an inquest that is going to be commence next year that King County is doing. However, in some ways, it feels ceremonial in the sense that it isn't a lack of information about about this case. It's a lack of accountability, as as the family is saying. As a matter of fact, the 2 officers who were involved in this shooting actually don't have to even appear at this hearing. So at this point, it appears that they won't face any other consequences other than what they've now faced, which initially one of the officers were suspended for 2 days or something. But other than that, there hasn't been much in the way of accountability the family feels.
Thank you, Marcus. Any other observations or questions from my guests?
I think the one thing that popped out to me in reading some of the reporting, reminding myself about this case after a couple of years, is the note that the officer who didn't have a taser, his battery was dead, and so he had left it back in his locker or whatever. And I thought just the lack of prioritization of the non-lethal response there. It's hard to imagine a similar situation where, like, something was wrong with your gun, so the police officer went out without it that day. And that's just that sort of particular note of noticing how unimportant that non-lethal response was, and that it just was a shrug and left it behind.
I was struck how the police officers were aware of her history, and I think they went into this situation kind of knowing, and it still ended up this way, which to me is getting back to what you were saying, Marcus, of like, this wasn't walking in with ignorance in terms of what they could be walking into. It was like either training or just overall approach, like how kind of set up for failure in many ways. So it gets to this broader reexamination you're talking about of like, there needs to be a whole new way of dealing with this, because this current system is clearly insufficient.
We were discussing this week's settlement, $3.5 billion settlement between the family of Charlena Lyles and the city of Seattle and 2 Seattle police officers. We are discussing the news of this week, as we do on Fridays, Week in Review. I'm your host, Bill Radke, and we've got Karen Weise here from the Seattle Times, and we've got Allison Williams from Seattle Met, and Marcus Green from South Seattle Emerald and the Seattle Times. And we are going to take a short break and come right back and get back at some of the other big stories this week. We'll fill you in. You can watch as well as listen when you go to YouTube or Facebook and search KUOW Public Radio. I'm Bill Radke. We're going to be right back.
Karen, I'd love to have you on the Seattle Times.
I'm the New York Times, Bill, close. I'm a subscriber.
94.9 KUOW,
Same for you all. Same
Seattle's
for South Seattle
NPR
Emerald.
news station. It's
Or like
12:38.
donor or whatever it's
Expect
called.
a
Partner.
cloudy afternoon and a rainy tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Isolde Raftery.
And I'm Dyer Oxley, and we are KUW's web editors, and we have weird names.
Which checks out, right? Because we work in public radio.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Anyway, we're here to tell you about Today So Far, our newsletter.
That's right. This gives you a rundown of all the news KUW is reporting today so far, sent directly to your email inbox every morning.
Sign up at kuow.org/today.
Support for KUOW comes from Rogers Behavioral Health, providing specialized mental health services in Bellevue, where patients receive treatment and care for the challenges of anxiety, OCD, depression, and other mood disorders. More at rogersbh.org.
It's Week in Review on KUOW Seattle. I'm Bill Radke, swinging with the technical issues as we do. We're talking remotely with Allison Williams and Karen Weise and Marcus Green. Everyone can hear me just fine? Hey, how about that? We are talking about the news of the week here on Week in Review. Allison, you were talking last night with some Seahawks fans, which maybe is something you would do anyway, but you were talking about their newest player, a future Hall of Famer. And what are people saying about Adrian Peterson?
Well, it popped up on my sort of internet Twitter feed, and some people were reacting negatively to the news of this player. And I thought, oh, gosh, where have I heard that name? I had to Google. I am not much of a football fan, and realized I had heard his name. And this is sad with the NFL. I knew it was something, some legal issues and crimes probably committed. And this was a gentleman who was went through a child abuse accusations, ended up sort of resolving it around 2014 with some game suspensions. And then he, I believe, came to some sort of settlement with that case. But he was known as the guy who'd spanked his child or used a switch on his child. And that sort of made him infamous in the news at the time. So I remember thinking, a player like this coming in on the practice squad for the Seahawks, it's a pretty minor thing. I probably would not normally hear about news of a practice squad player coming in. Yeah, it sort of surprised me. Although in talking to Seahawks fans, I was like, the Seahawks fans specifically are more concerned with his age and place on the practice squad and some more technical things around his playing style.
This is a end of his career, 36-year-old future Hall of Famer, but signed to the practice squad. So it's he gets to keep playing, and I don't know what kind of contribution he'll get, but that's the age reference you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. Age in football, which is, a little depressing sometimes to realize how young that is to be old in football. Yes.
Yeah. Sports years.
Yeah. But, as far as I sort of was one of those things that came up as like, oh yeah, it's that guy. And it's sort of, as we look at our recent conversations about cancel culture and the kind of things that follow people around for their career, it's interesting to see how he was sort of an infamous player for a little while. But though the Seahawks have as a team in time sort of expressed that they would not accept the kind of players that have gone through some of the issues that we see elsewhere in the league, I don't think that they're necessarily any different from the rest of the NFL as far as the players that they will consider. They were looking at Antonio Brown, I believe, last year, or Russell Wilson was pushing for the team to take that player. And he's someone who had been in the middle of rape accusations and sexual assault accusations and even more.
Yeah, I saw the Seattle Times reporter Lewis Cam tweeted a quote from the Seahawks general manager from 9 years ago. Quote, "We would never, ever take a player that struck a female or had a domestic dispute like that or did anything like that," whatever anything like that means. But Marcus, you pointed out this isn't new for the Seahawks.
No, we've actually been here before, and I got to say it's somewhat maybe hypocritical from the fan base because in 2014, the Seattle Seahawks drafted Frank Clark. He was a defensive end out at the University of Minnesota, and previously he had a suspicion, and I believe was actually charged with a domestic violence situation with his then girlfriend at the time. And yet, even though the Seahawks GM John Snyder said that they did their due diligence, it came out later on that they didn't actually talk to the victim or survivor of that particular case. And what he'd been on the Seahawks roster, I want to say, for the last 4 years prior to going recently to Kansas City. So I mean, I think this is a situation, as Allison pointed out to, that I don't know if this is Seahawks culture as much as this is the NFL's culture, right? You have people, the teammate now, Frank Clark's Tyreek Hill, who's as beloved as the fastest man in the NFL. And yet in 2014, he was arrested for striking his pregnant girlfriend in the stomach, face, and trying to strangle her. And then just in 2019, he had an issue where he was investigated for breaking his 3-year-old's arm, yet he was rewarded with a contract and got to play in the Super Bowl last year. So again, I mean, I think this is an issue where the Seahawks, like most other teams in the NFL, believe that their fan base will tolerate certain things. And unfortunately, it seems like some of that tolerance includes domestic violence.
Is it fair to say that Seahawks fans aren't any different from fans anywhere else in the country when it comes to expecting more from their team?
I don't know that we've.
Yeah. What do y'all
I don't
think?
know that we've seen anywhere across the country where football, a particular football program is changing their expectations dramatically compared to the rest. I just think it's interesting to compare it to maybe the other teams in Seattle that have sort of support and the cultural support we have for the Seahawks here. Right now they're not doing terribly well in winning, but I don't know that changes expectations of what we see or think. I don't know if we would accept this from a different team. It's obviously other professional sports have their same issues. It's not isolated to the NFL. It's just much more, I think, obvious and certainly discussed in the NFL.
Allison, I'm wondering how much, and Karen, please feel free, both of you, to weigh in. I'm wondering how much of this tolerance goes to the violence itself of the sport. Like I've recently become a mixed martial arts fan, because of Bill, and one of the
Follow my career.
And I know some of their top names have had, like John Jones has had some, domestic violence issues recently. And it seems like those things just going to get glossed over, very similarly to football. I mean, how much of it is just the nature and violence of the game? In some ways, people sort of are almost expecting, violence from the players or participants, versus, I don't know, tennis or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess there's a slight argument to be made that something like hockey also has, short bouts of, violence and aggression that are part of the game, but probably I'm not a sports expert, but I would say probably not to the extent that football does. I mean, culturally, I think it's been well talked about that the culture of football is definitely one that has specific ties to violence and aggression. So I think
celebrated on the field in some ways. Yeah. I don't really follow football. So in part because I don't get the violence is just not appealing to me. Yeah. So, and same with like the hockey, it's just not appealing to me. And I think like I have a kid, do I really want that to be the sport that our family watches together or participates in together if I can choose something else?
Yeah.
You still learn all the amazing things about sports can be about, essentially.
I'd be lying if I told you I didn't enjoy Kenny Easley doing terrible looking things to people for the Seahawks over the past years. So yes, that's fair. We're talking here with, that was Karen Weise, the New York Times tech correspondent, and we've got Seattle Mets Allison Williams, South Seattle Emerald publisher, and Seattle Times columnist Marcus Green. And you're on, Karen, you're on the Amazon beat a lot, and here it is. Our state's biggest employer facing the biggest retail rush of the year with a labor shortage and the pandemic. How they've been handling all that?
They crushed it, apparently, as Amazon tends to do a lot. Yeah, it's interesting. Broadly, this kind of Black Friday to Cyber Monday stretch that we just finished was pretty flat across the country for retailers, but Amazon said they had record sales. Actually, there was some reporting from Business Insider that their sales were up 10%, according to their internal data, apparently, which is pretty striking given that sales were up really high last year. And broadly, the industry didn't see that much because people have been buying earlier, right? I mean, how much have we heard about the supply chain problems and whatnot? And there aren't as many deals because there's not as much product. So retailers don't have as much reason to discount stuff when you know that you have demand for what you've got and things like that. And they're kind of, Amazon is achieving this at a lot of cost because they're having trouble with staffing up fully, like a lot of employers are. And they had this problem beforehand where we found a really, really high churn model for their hourly workforce before the Great Resignation. And so they have this added hurdle of constantly having to replace their workforce. And they're spending $4 billion this quarter just on labor related expenses to try to meet all the deliveries and the demand that they're seeing. So they're throwing money at the problem right now.
You say that this churn in the hourly workforce. You also reported, and I've read this, that Jeff Bezos had a philosophy that churn was good, but was he talking about more the engineer, the designers, the corporate, executives when he talked about needing new ideas, or does Amazon have? I can't imagine why they would want churn in their workforce and warehouse and delivery workforce.
Yeah, actually, this was an idea really pegged to the hourly workforce, to the warehouse workforce, that they found people were less productive over time in those hourly roles. And instead of focusing on how to engage them more or promote them or things like that, their focus historically had been on helping them find new work elsewhere, or paying them to leave, things like that. They stopped giving automatic pay increases after a couple of years. And in the corporate world, it's interesting to what degree this spilled over. They have what they call unregretted attrition targets. So they insist
unregretted attrition.
Very lovely term, very hated internally, I would say.
Okay.
They insist it's not stack ranking, but it's a very I will say most employees call it stack ranking. So that's just you can choose your side of that, but it's a very like Jack Welchy 1990s idea that there's a kind of pushing the bottom chunk out. It's not necessarily, not even close to the rates of churn that you see at the warehouses. I've heard of unregretted attrition targets of like 6% a year in the past, whereas we found the turnover in the buildings, in the warehouses, was 150% a year, which is just twice the industry average, and there's an incredible amount of churn. A lot of people coming to work at Amazon and then just kind of falling out of the system, and some on purpose and some just getting their hopes dashed because they think they're joining this employer of the future.
Yeah, right. I always have questions. How about Marcus, Allison, any observations or questions?
I was actually curious what this might mean for the future. I mean, Amazon has taught us all what to expect of online retail. I mean, we accept it, and it sounds to me like they're willing to make some sacrifices, spend some more money to keep our expectation of that fast, free shipping. It's not free because you paid for it with your Prime membership. I know I've changed my expectations on other retailers. I ordered something from Nordstrom and it ended up taking a week and a half to get to me, and it's the supply chain. I understand that now, but I'm not sure if I've changed my expectations for Amazon. Do you think that is more important now than ever for them to continue that expectation, and can they maintain it with that kind of staffing turnover?
Yeah. So they, before the pandemic, had been rushing to move from 2-day shipping to 1-day shipping, and literally like the very quarter they announced that, sales reaccelerated. They kicked up again. Like, we are all really, really susceptible. And I don't remember early in the pandemic, it got really slow, even from Amazon. And so they've been pushing to get more items back at 2-day and then more back to that 1-day goal. And they talk about that really regularly, because that's going to be the advantage, that getting us, because you learned, I bet, from your other retailers, it's okay if a lot of things don't come in 2 days or 3 days, or sometimes a week, right? I mean, there are some things where it's nice, but when you get used to it, it's really hard to reset. And the pandemic was a bit of a reset. And so I think they're trying to get back to the faster model, where they are really shine in terms of being able to deliver on that.
Well, and I think my sense is that's what they've got over some other retailers is, sometimes it's cheaper on Amazon, sometimes it's not really, and if you're coming down to cents, the supporting other businesses might take precedence, or the ease, or whatever it is. And to my sense is that they've really taught us to expect that. And that is what they absolutely have to maintain more than almost anything else.
There's a Wall Street analyst who said that Amazon they've raised their wages a number of times this year because of the labor crunch, essentially. And there's a Wall Street analyst that said they should raise them by a ton more because that will be a competitive advantage because they can afford it in a way that other retailers can't afford it. And this Wall Street analyst says it would be what's called a competitive moat, but that would basically give them more, like a bigger step that other places couldn't keep up with.
Yeah, Karen, it almost sounded like reading your story and listening to your interview on the Daily, it almost sounded like it was a reverse pyramid scheme. So like how many people can they continue to just churn through at this rate though?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that's being debated a lot inside Amazon in Seattle now. Amazon's made this pledge to be Earth's best employer, but they've had this incredibly high churn kind of callous model so far, but it's generally worked for them, or at least, and right now they can kind of solve it with money. And its founder kind of embraced this model. So how do you turn, can you turn, like there's a lot of people inside Amazon that hope it will, both from a business perspective of we're going to need more workers, but also just as like a human, not liking the idea of kind of burning through people in that way.
But otherwise, how do you employ every single person on Earth at least once?
Right. But it was
maybe that was the goal. Maybe we all misheard it.
It was so interesting to us that when we brought them our findings earlier this year about this turnover, the response we got back wasn't like, oh, we're really working hard to bring that number down, or this number is unacceptable. We know that. The response was much more like, well, we're happy to provide work to people when they need it. Some people just need it for a season of their life. Or it was just, attrition was just one number that without the other context doesn't have much meaning, but without really elaborating. So it wasn't really, you got to like, it wasn't the admitting a problem stage of whatever process sort of thing necessarily. So we'll see. It's a TBD.
All right. The attrition is unregretted. How did they finally, Karen, how did Amazon deal with the internet ending this week?
They survived the end of the internet. Can you believe it?
Allison, you brought these signs. I think it was you that brought these signs to our attention.
No, I know that I had a coworker talking about them, and so I had heard about it through him. One thing that just totally struck me, there were these signs up around Seattle with yesterday's date, I believe, and saying that the internet was going to end at 2 p.m. or something. There was a website.
It looks like a string. Looks like a string of code. If two were in 120222021.
We have all our palindrome dates going on right now.
Yes, it reads the same backward or forward, which happens. That's going to happen in the year 2021.
So I believe the website shifted to sort of looked like a marketing website for a book, if I remember correctly, at the 2 p.m. The thing that totally struck me about this, other than people are asking, oh, what's going to happen at 2 o'clock? Was that the joke about there being an end to the internet? Like, are 17-year-olds getting that joke? Like, the internet is not a single entity that, like, those of us back in the series of tubes era made jokes about actually reaching the end of the internet because it was a finite number of pages. It's not even just a series of pages now. And it's such a part of society that I just thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be the like people in their rocking chairs making jokes about the end of the internet, and like the concept will be beyond younger generations.
Well, and I remember Y2K. I mean, that whole thing. And then like everything. I remember my mom.
There will just not be an internet for a while.
My mom convinced me not to take a trip then because she thought I wouldn't be able to take a plane back after Y2K happened. I will say that on me for letting myself be persuaded. Never done that. But.
Marcus, what would that be like if the internet did suddenly end? If that, whatever that means.
Yeah, no, I mean, it actually reminded me of about 3 years ago. I was at the Skyway Library working, and it was right after these kids got out of school. They're like 12 to 14 years old, and the Wi-Fi went out, and everybody there is just like moaning and begrudging, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do? This is going to be so boring." And the librarian makes an announcement, and she's like, well, there's all these multitude of books around, maybe you could read.
We have books.
and there's like this epiphany that, oh yeah, you go to the library, you can actually read a book. So I don't know, if it ended, I would hope that there would be a mass rereading, I guess. I don't know.
Beautiful. All right. It's time to wrap up the show. We're always ending on things making us smile. I said I went to live theater last night, and Emerald City Comic Con is back through Sunday at the State Convention Center after being canceled a couple times. Usually it's in spring, so wear your very warm costume. And before I say goodbye to my guests, I just want to let you know that we want to know what's making you happy. we've got KOW's bringing our first and only live show of 2021. We're slipping it in at the end. We're going to do our year in review show on December 16th. That's a Thursday night, 7 o'clock at Town Hall, Seattle. The in-person tickets are sold out, so somebody's going to theater. But what you can do is sign up for our live stream. So that way we'll send you a reminder. We'll send you the Zoom link. Just go to kuow.org/events. And when you do that, we'd love to know what has made you smile all year long. We always ask at the end of the show, we say something made us happy. We could include you in our year in review show if when you go to kuow.org/events, you click that big orange button and see how to send in something that made you happy. We did this last year and it was beautiful. Something that made you smile this year. Again, kuow.org/events. Okay, team, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for being Week in Review this week.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Love to see you. Marcus Green is author of Readying to Rise, and he publishes at South Seattle Emerald and writes a column at the Seattle Times. And Karen Weise covers technology for the New York Times. And Allison Williams is a deputy editor at Seattle Met. And we just love when you come together and we can wave at you on YouTube and Facebook, and we can listen to you describe what happened this week and what it means. Will you do it again soon, please?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Please.
Lovely. Great to see you all. And thanks for tuning in to Week in Review on KUOW Seattle. Hope to be seeing you on Year in Review. But for this week, the show, is produced by, we've got Sarah Leibovitz, we've got Alec Cowan, we have got Kevin Kniested and Bernard Wallette running the board, Tio Popescu and Juan Pablo Chiquiza on social media and live streaming. And thank you for listening as always. We'll see you again next week.